Terrence Howard recently went on the Joe Rogan Experience, and its release on May 18th set the internet on fire. Terrence presented Joe with some of his work that attempts to break the current modern scientific paradigm. His ideas combine certain esoteric spiritual ideas, such as the flower of life, an erroneous understanding of current scientific thinking, and alternative figures in the scientific community, such as Tesla, whose name is frequently tied up with absurdities such as infinite zero-point energy and conspiracy theories around the suppression of that technology. In summary, his ideas can be thrown into the mystical intuition bucket, supported by a misunderstanding of materialistic theories. And wow, the internet had a great time with that. It was a great day for the Joe Rogan Experience, and not such a great day for Terrence Howard. It's interesting to consider that while everybody has felt comfortable and justified in pointing and laughing at Terrence, nearly all of them fail to see where their thinking falls into categories like faith, falsehood, and other forms of irrationality. It really is a tragedy of the human condition that, in comparison to seeing the faults in others, it's so difficult to see our own. This is equally applicable to groups of people as it is to individuals. Always remember, there cannot be infinite truths. This is the logical equivalent of there being zero truths. Fast forward to last week, and this topic is back in the news. Why? Because Neil deGrasse Tyson, a popular member of the mainstream scientific establishment, shared the following response video.
I recently learned I got name-checked by Terrence Howard on his recent appearance on Joe Rogan.
Through Neil's response, we can see how the scientific establishment thinks. And by understanding how the scientific establishment thinks, we can begin to see the areas where their thinking is flawed. Let's get into it.
So this is Terrence Howard attempting to reinvent mathematics and physics.
Here, Neil has made the mistake of grouping every idea not endorsed by the scientific establishment into the same bucket. This critically overlooks any system that can contribute to the discussion where empiricist materialism falls short. And right off the bat, it's a category error to put mathematics and physics on equal footing. Mathematics is not something man invented. Mathematics is an eternal and necessary system. You could also call it a language. Mathematics is the universe. There is only mathematics. Physics is a human interpretation, or a heuristic, of ontological mathematics that, while has clear technological utility, has no scope to provide us with the final answers to existence in its current form. It is absolutely the case that we need a fundamental paradigm shift in physics away from scientific materialism and towards rational idealism in the form of ontics.
And I thought, out of respect for him, what I should do is give him my most informed critical analysis that I can. In my field, we call that a peer review. You come up with an idea, you present it either at a conference or you first write it up and you send it to your colleagues.
While it is true that a review process aids in the development of thinking, it does not guarantee that thinking develops in the correct direction. The problem has arisen in the scientific establishment where an echo chamber exists in the peer review process, resulting from every reviewer having the same fundamental worldview. At no time is the review of a person that does not subscribe to the current empiricist, materialist paradigm admitted into the discussion. The result is, as is the case in every echo chamber, that no one looks for reasons to doubt the fundamental assumptions of the group, and legitimate critiques are never truly heard. The idea that the most popular scientific theories of today are objectively true is a mistaken one. Many scientific theories are dismissed not because they were ever disproven, but simply because they fall out of popularity within the scientific community. The scientific theory of ether, for example, was never disproven, but instead fell out of favor when Einstein introduced his special theory of relativity. Even Einstein experienced this when he argued against the latest chaotic and random interpretation of quantum physics. His famous quote, "God does not play dice," was ignored by his peers who simply preferred the indeterministic model. As Max Planck said, a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents die, and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. Science advances one funeral at a time. This is the echo chamber that has led us down the current flawed path where our two leading systems, general relativity and quantum field theory, are fundamentally incompatible. And yet the entire establishment continues to spend an incredible amount of time and resources attempting to reconcile them.
If you're a fan of a subject, let's say, a hobbyist, let's call it, it's possible to know enough about that subject to think you're right, but not enough about that subject to know that you're wrong. And so there's this sort of valley in there, a valley of false confidence. This has been studied by others, and it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's the phenomenon where a little bit of knowledge, you over-assess how much of that subject you actually know. And then when you learn even more, you realize, no, I didn't know as much as I thought I did.
While this is true in some regard, Neil fails to realize that the scientific establishment does not stick to their realm of expertise. It would be one thing if scientists said that their work is explicitly limited to the observations they make and their correlating equations, and declined to speak towards the ontological or epistemological nature of the universe, but this is not the case. The problem is when the scientific establishment makes claims that they have no empiricist or materialist evidence for. The most glaring example of this is the claim made by the scientific community that absence of empirical evidence is evidence of absence. This claim results in the immediate impossibility of everything that is unobservable, such as mind and consciousness. It's easy to see how this is a flaw in the thinking of scientists. As Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz pointed out, if you could blow up the brain to the size of a mill and walk about inside, you would not find consciousness. Each of us possesses a mind, and yet because it cannot be observed, science says it's a strange epiphenomena of material existence, a claim lacking any empirical evidence whatsoever. This stance by the scientific establishment is, in fact, the assertion that materialism is right and idealism, or any dual-aspect ontology, such as mind and matter, is wrong. With this stance, the scientific establishment crosses over from the realm where they are the experts, making observations and defining them mathematically, into where they are the hobbyists. Philosophy. The following statement made by Neil is right on the money.
This is an ambitious work that is a clear indication of a restless, active mind. Within these pages, however, there are many assumptions and statements that are underinformed, misinformed, or simply false, thereby compromising or nullifying many of the subsequent conclusions you have drawn. So then I just say, this opening thesis is false. There are plenty of examples of this that have escaped your attention, to the extent that the next 35 pages depends on your stated thesis. This fact undermines your claims and assumptions and conclusions.
And same goes for scientific materialism. The fallible human senses are by no means a reliable base to build with, and yet step one of the scientific method is to observe. As we discussed a minute ago, this paradigm has several consequences that limit the scope of the scientific establishment's ability to discover the objective truth. We can see this blind spot as Neil discusses Terrence's paper.
Regarding your world was flat reference, it's not widely appreciated that the idea of a flat Earth predates the introduction and development of the methods and tools of science as we practice them today. Those processes date back to around 1600, coincident with the invention of the microscope and telescope. Before then, truths were whatever seemed right to the senses. Afterwards, and to this day, truth was whatever the verified data obtained by your instruments forced you to believe if your senses otherwise contradicted the data. And you reach a point where enough evidence is brought to bear on the question, and then you have a new emergent truth.
This is a philosophical statement, not a scientific one. This is the stance that the only means to gather truth about our universe is to collect external data, which we can contrast with the idealist, rationalist tradition that asserts that, while external data can be useful, it cannot reveal the fundamental inner workings of the universe. In fact, Materialism and empiricism are contingent on faith in the senses. Fundamentally, science is not about ontology. Science is only about what is observable, and herein lies its limitations.
Go back to Pythagoras, famous for the Pythagorean theorem, which we all learned in 8th grade, was it, or 9th grade? Pythagoras was also a philosopher who tried to understand how things worked. He felt, among others in his group, that if you assign a number to something, the number can imbue that object with certain meaning and significance, which means then if you manipulate the numbers, that you gain insight into the objects themselves once you've assigned a number to it. There's a lot of that that permeates this document, but it's a long disproven approach to the world.
Here, we can again see a dismissive stance towards philosophy. Sadly, Neil categorizes Pythagoras' thinking as a long and disproven approach to the world, which is a fundamental failure to recognize the foundational contribution he has made in the way that we in the West think about everything in the world. Pythagoras has had influence on every aspect of Western philosophical, cultural, religious, political, and scientific thought. Similarly, Plato and Aristotle are widely recognized for their influence in these categories. But as Bertrand Russell points out, what appears to be Platonism is, when analyzed, found in essence to be Pythagoreanism. The whole concept of an eternal world revealed to the intellect, but not to the senses, is derived from him. Philosophy has made a tremendous impact on the world that we live in, and it's time to bring it back into the fold of scientific discourse. It may just be the key that we need to overcome the deadlock we've seen in the scientific community over the last century. If the scientific establishment is seen as the sole authority on the nature of the universe, the lens we see the world through becomes increasingly materialistic and nihilistic. This strategy causes us to lose many of the incredible contributions that have been made by brilliant philosophers such as Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle. Furthermore, it places us in a state of inconsistency and incompleteness in our understanding of the world around us and the internal world of who we are. Neil finished the video with his signature sign-off.
As always, keep looking up.
This is a statement of encouragement that the truth can be found outside of ourselves, such as among the stars in the skies or the laws that govern them. We can label this as an empiricist, materialist statement. The truth is in the outer world. Challenge your fundamental assumptions. Be open to new ideas from new fields of study. If you can collect wisdom across many fields of study, you'll be much better off than if you limit yourself to only one. This is exactly what the scientific establishment needs to do to overcome the stagnation we're currently seeing. Keep looking within. As the ancient wisdom says, as within, so without. As above, so below. As with the universe, so the soul.